In a nice part of town, though it was never quite as grand as some of the newer high-rises you'd see popping up everywhere. It was comfortable, a place that had grown to hold all the precious memories of raising Emily and navigating through the early turbulent years of marriage with David. It was also the place where I was now standing, feeling utterly displaced by the sharp turn of events. Today had started like any other Tuesday. I was arranging flowers in the living room, humming softly to myself when Alicia, David's new assistant, came over. She had been around a lot lately, supposedly for work-related reasons, but I had started to suspect otherwise. My suspicions were confirmed today, standing in the living room with David by my side and Alicia, 6 months pregnant, conspicuously making herself at home. Alicia had the nerve to ask me to move out of my own spot in the kitchen because, apparently, I was in her way as she reached for the tea. Her gesture was gentle, almost delicate, as she touched her belly, but her eyes didn't match the kindness of her act. There was something calculating about the way she looked at me, a stark contrast to the supposed vulnerability of her condition. It was then that Alicia made a remark about a pregnant woman having a kinder expression, almost as if challenging me to question her intentions or her current state. David, to my disbelief, supported her. He suggested, with far too much ease, that I could sleep in the storage room if things were too uncomfortable for me around the house. The casualness of his words stung deeply. It wasn't just the betrayal of him siding with Alicia, it was the nonchalant dismissal of our years together, as if all our shared moments could be packed away as easily as an old blanket into storage. Feeling a mix of shock and numbness, I agreed to make myself scarce. "All right then," I said, more to myself than to them, trying to process the rapid unraveling of my daily reality. David, seemingly relieved and perhaps a bit too eagerly, took Alicia's hand right there in front of me. They exchanged looks that were all at once intimate and dismissive of my presence. The sight of them together, David with his newfound happiness and Alicia with her dreamy gaze fixed on him, wiped away any lingering melancholy I had felt. It was replaced with a hot, seething anger. The kind of anger that simmers quietly before it decides whether to extinguish itself or to burn everything down. I told them I'd leave by tomorrow, adding maybe a touch too sarcastically that perhaps I should stay out tonight, considering the condo seemed to already be Alicia's and David's new sanctuary. As I left, David's parting words were a gleeful affirmation that the home was now theirs. I nodded slightly, a gesture more for myself than for their benefit, a silent acknowledgement of the end of an era and the beginning of something new for me. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit my face, and I allowed myself a small, knowing smile. Despite the sharp pang of betrayal, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I might be a 46-year-old housewife on the surface, enjoying my quiet coffees and daily routines, but beneath that, I was someone who hadn't just spent the last 20 years idly. My investments, my secret forays into the world of finance, had been fruitful. I had plans and resources they knew nothing about. And as I walked down the street, away from the condo that had been my home, my mind began racing with possibilities. The future was uncertain, but I was no stranger to challenges. After all, a life seemingly spent in the background had prepared me well for moments just like this, to emerge, perhaps unexpectedly, as the protagonist of my own story. There was a history I hadn't been privy to, a tangled web of past loves and obligations. Learning about my father and his second wife's history, I felt a mixture of resentment and understanding. Life, as it seemed, was filled with complicated emotions and relationships that often lay dormant until stirred by unforeseen events. As I pondered these revelations, I focused on the immediate challenges. The move to the new, smaller house felt both a physical and metaphorical downsizing of my life's previous expansiveness. The place was cozy, sure, but it was starkly different from the life I had known. It was intended as a practical step towards a simpler, more manageable lifestyle as we edged closer to retirement, but the reality was proving to be more complex. David's increasingly frequent late nights and the lingering smell of alcohol were becoming too much. The excuses about dinners and weekend outings piled up until they were just a part of the background noise of our strained relationship. This growing distance between us wasn't what I had envisioned for our supposed golden years. We had separate beds now, and I had started spending most nights in the study, which I had converted into my personal refuge. The emotional and physical space between us expanded when we started the process of moving. I handled the moving announcements because David never had a knack for those details. I sent out letters diligently, reaching out to David's family and our mutual friends. For my part, with both my parents gone and my contact with my father's side of the family cut off due to my strained relationship with Alicia, my communications were brief and to the point. It was unsettling to think that the sister I once knew as a toddler was now at the center of the turmoil in my marriage. Alicia, 14 years my junior, had grown up in the shadow of our family's complex dynamics. After our parents' tragic accident, I had tried to maintain some semblance of connection with her, but as years passed, our lives diverged drastically, leading us to this tumultuous reunion under the same roof, now as rivals rather than siblings. In my solitude, I often reflected on these ironies and the cruel twists of fate. The small, two-bedroom house, while comfortable in its simplicity, was now a stage for the latest act of an ongoing family drama. As I lay in the study-turned-bedroom, I pondered over my next moves. My investments were doing well, and I had financial security independent of my marriage, which gave me some comfort. Yet, the thought of what lay ahead was daunting. Navigating this new chapter, with its undercurrents of past grievances and unresolved family ties, I knew I had to tread carefully. The complexity of my relationships with David and Alicia weighed heavily on me, but I also knew that I had the resilience and savvy to manage whatever might come. The quiet nights in the study gave me plenty of time to plan, to think, and to decide how I would write the next pages of my story. I muttered something about audacity and boundaries. The air in the room thickened with tension. It was clear that Alicia's arrival wasn't just a casual visit, it was a calculated intrusion into the calm I had finally managed to cultivate after years of turmoil. "Look, Alicia," I began, trying to keep my tone steady despite the anger simmering just below the surface. "This isn't a good time. I don't appreciate you showing up unannounced and assuming you can just stay here." Alicia shrugged, her smirk still playing at the corners of her lips. "Come on, Catherine, don't be like that. It's been years, and besides, I thought family helped family. Isn't that what you always preached?" Her words were like a barbed wire, each syllable designed to provoke. I remembered all too well the childhood years where I was more servant than sister. The countless chores, the financial control, the emotional neglect, all while Alicia was coddled and pampered. It was ironic how she now sought refuge with me, the sister she had once looked down upon. "I've helped enough over the years," I retorted, my voice firm. "It's not my job to provide for you anymore. You need to learn to stand on your own, Alicia. I did when I was your age, without any help." She scoffed, clearly unprepared for my pushback. "Well, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. You were always the cold one, weren't you? Mom used to say." "Don't," I cut her off sharply. "Don't bring her into this. You know nothing about my relationship with our mother." Alicia paused, perhaps realizing she had struck a nerve. Okay, she sighed, leaning back on the couch, her attitude shifting slightly. "Look, I'm sorry for just barging in. But honestly, I didn't know where else to go. Things with my husband are not great, and I just needed a place to think, away from all that." Her voice softened, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of vulnerability. It was disarming, but years of built-up defenses didn't crumble so easily. "Alicia, I can't fix your life for you. You're an adult now. You need to face your own challenges, not run away from them. I can give you a couple of nights, but that's it. You need to make other arrangements." She nodded slowly, perhaps a bit chastened. "Okay, I understand. Thank you, Catherine. A few nights to clear my head, and I'll figure something out." As she settled in, I couldn't help but feel a complex mix of emotions. There was resentment, certainly, but also a begrudging sympathy for her plight. It was a reminder of how deeply our pasts were entangled, and how, despite everything, we were still inexorably linked as family. My thoughts were a whirlwind as I considered what this unexpected reunion meant for both of us moving forward. The moment Alicia uttered those words, it was as if the last 2 decades of suppressed grievances had come crashing down around me. My hands trembled with a cocktail of shock and outrage as I stood there, watching her sit so comfortably in my space, treating me not as a sister, but as an intruder in my own home. I stared at her, words catching in my throat. Here she was, Alicia, dictating terms in the house that I had shared with David, the home we had made together. The irony of her repeating almost the exact scenario that had driven me out of my father's house all those years ago was not lost on me. You know, Alicia, I began, my voice steady, despite the chaos swirling within me. There's a limit to how much I can bear. And you have crossed it. This is still my home. She looked up at me, her expression unchanging, that smirk still playing on her lips. Oh, come on, Catherine. We're just one big happy family here, aren't we? Her tone was mocking, and it grated on me more than I could express. As I struggled to form a response, David walked in, his timing as impeccable as ever. His face lit up seeing Alicia, but darkened slightly upon noticing my presence and the obvious tension. What's going on here? He asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and annoyance. Nothing, Alicia chirped, before I could speak. Just discussing some family matters. David nodded, seemingly satisfied with her explanation, and turned to leave. But I couldn't let this go, not this time. David, I called out, my voice firmer. He stopped, but didn't turn around. Is this what our marriage has come to? Am I to be the outsider in my own home? There was a heavy pause, filled with unspoken words and stifled emotions. Finally, David turned, his expression a mix of confusion and defensiveness. Catherine, it's not like that. Alicia needs us right now. And what about what I need? I countered, the frustration and hurt bubbling over. What about respect and decency in my own home? David seemed taken aback, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite read, guilt, perhaps, or maybe just surprise at my assertiveness. Alicia, however, didn't seem to care. She waved a dismissive hand and said, Catherine, don't be so dramatic. It's not like you're being thrown out. I took a deep breath, centering myself. No, Alicia, I'm not being thrown out. But I'm not going to be walked over either. I fixed my gaze on David. We need to talk, David. Seriously talk. Without Alicia. David nodded, almost imperceptibly, and after a moment's hesitation, agreed. All right, Catherine. Let's talk. As Alicia's face fell slightly, a small part of me felt a flicker of victory, not out of spite, but out of a desperate need for recognition and respect. I knew that this conversation with David might not solve everything, but it was a start, a chance to reclaim some semblance of control and perhaps, to start mending the deeply frayed edges of our marriage. For the space it provided me to think and act without their immediate interference. The silence of the house, now void of their voices, was both eerie and soothing. It was as if the walls themselves were taking a deep breath, preparing for the new chapter that was about to begin. As I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoed, a stark reminder of the emptiness that now filled my home. The reality of David and Alicia's departure, while momentarily liberating, also brought a flood of memories, both sweet and bitter, that we had created in this space. But with each step, I felt more determined to reclaim my life and identity, which had been overshadowed by my role as a wife and mother for so long. I spent the morning at the attorney's office, discussing the logistics of the divorce and ensuring that my interests were protected. The attorney was sympathetic, yet professional, outlining the steps we would take to secure a fair settlement. His assurance was comforting, yet the gravity of formally ending my marriage was overwhelming. After the meeting, I returned home, where the moving company had begun packing up the remnants of my past life. The sight of my personal belongings, some of which I had not seen in years because they had been buried under the clutter of a shared life, being boxed up felt surreal. The movers were respectful and efficient, a stark contrast to the chaos of my personal life. When I found David's wedding ring at the bottom of the cardboard box, my heart sank. The tarnished band, once a symbol of our union, now felt like a heavy weight. The realization that he had carelessly discarded it along with my books and cosmetics added insult to injury. I picked it up, turned it in my hand, and felt a sting of betrayal that was sharper than I had anticipated. The note from David and Alicia about their trip and the request to clean the house was the epitome of their self-centeredness. Yet, it was also a gift in disguise. Their absence provided me with the opportunity to make decisions without facing immediate confrontations or manipulations. With a newfound sense of resolve, I instructed the movers to pack everything they could. I decided to donate much of the clothing and other personal items that no longer served me or brought me joy. It was a physical and symbolic shedding of my old life. The rest of the day was spent in a flurry of activity, organizing and directing the movers, making lists of things to do and people to contact. I was creating a plan not just for the next few days, but for my future. As the sun set, I stood in the now nearly empty living room, the weight of the day's emotions settling in. The quiet was profound, and in that silence, I felt the first real stirrings of freedom. This was no longer the house I had shared with David, it was becoming my space, a blank canvas on which I could rebuild my life, my way. The thought of the days ahead was daunting, but exhilarating. There was much to do, and the journey would undoubtedly be challenging. Yet, I felt equipped to face it, bolstered by the knowledge that I was finally taking control of my destiny. When she moved in, claiming she wanted only the best for her future child, what she didn't realize was that I had set it up to also record audio, a decision prompted by a lingering suspicion and the need to protect myself. As I explained this to David, there was silence on the other end of the line, a heavy, sinking silence that spoke volumes. The realization that I had been steps ahead, preparing for this moment, must have been a bitter pill for him to swallow. I can't believe you'd do that, David finally stammered, his voice a mixture of incredulity and fear. Believe it, David, I said calmly. I had to protect myself. You and Alicia made choices, and now you have to live with them. I am no longer your fallback plan, your safety net. You chose a different path, and it's time you walked it, without me. David was flustered, his voice cracking as he attempted to salvage the situation. Catherine, please, think about this. We can fix it. We can go to counseling, we can. I cut him off, firm and resolute. It's too late for that, David. I've made my decision. You need to accept it. As for the house, it was always mine to do with as I saw fit. You didn't contribute to it financially, and Alicia certainly didn't. I've been more than fair in storing your belongings. You can collect them whenever you wish. There was a long pause, and then David let out a long, defeated sigh. What about us? What about all the years we spent together? Those years were based on a trust you broke, I replied. I cherished those years, David, but they are in the past. Now, I need to think about my future. And that future no longer includes you. David didn't say anything for a few moments, and I could almost hear his mind racing, trying to come up with something to say, some way to mend the unbridgeable gap that had formed between us. Finally, he whispered, almost inaudibly, I'm sorry, Catherine. I know, I replied, softer this time. Goodbye, David. I hung up before he could respond, a mixture of relief and sorrow washing over me. I looked around my new apartment, the small space that already felt more like home than the large, empty house I had left behind. It was filled with my things, my choices, my independence. I felt a profound sense of peace, knowing I was finally free to build a life on my own terms, unencumbered by the deceit and betrayal that had marked the latter years of my marriage. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was mine, and mine alone, to shape. As I returned to my book, the phone by my side silent now, I felt ready to face whatever came next. Alicia and David made their choices, and now they're facing the consequences. I have no obligation to cushion the fallout for either of them. You seem to be misinformed, I said calmly into the phone. I am not responsible for Alicia's actions, nor am I responsible for her well-being. She chose to betray me, her sister, by having an affair with my husband. I am merely protecting my interests and seeking what is owed to me. The relative paused, possibly taken aback by my firm stance. But she's family, and she's pregnant. You can't just turn your back on family. That may be, I replied, but let me ask you, where was this concern for family when Alicia decided to engage in an affair with my husband? Where was her concern for me, her sister, then? Family loyalty seems to be a one-way street in this situation. There was a heavy silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. I could almost hear the cogs turning, the realizations may be dawning that their intervention might not be as straightforward as they had hoped. Look, I continued, my voice unwavering, I have evidence of their affair. Everything has been recorded, and my lawyer is fully informed. I suggest Alicia and David prepare themselves accordingly. As for a new house or any form of compensation from my side, that is out of the question. The call ended shortly after, the relative still trying to argue Alicia's case, but I was done. I had said what I needed to, and my position was clear. I turned off the recorder on my new phone, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. It was draining to constantly defend my decisions to people who had no understanding of the betrayal and pain I had endured. As I sat back, the weight of the entire ordeal pressing down on me, I reminded myself why I was taking these steps. This was not just about revenge, this was about justice and self-respect. I had been wronged deeply, and while the path I had chosen was fraught with confrontation and challenges, it was also leading me toward a new life of autonomy and peace. In the days that followed, the barrage of calls and messages slowly petered out. David and Alicia seemed to have finally accepted that I was not going to be swayed or bullied into submission. My lawyer kept me updated on the proceedings, and everything was moving as planned. I spent my evenings in my new apartment, enjoying the solitude and the space to think. The one-bedroom near Emily's university was becoming a home, filled with my things, arranged just how I liked. I enrolled in a few online courses, reigniting old passions that had been buried under years of marital compromise. I was rediscovering myself, and with each passing day, the pain and betrayal became a little more distant, a chapter of my life that was closing, making way for new beginnings. David's plea echoed in the cramped lawyer's office, filled with the heavy air of tension and dashed dreams. I sat across from them, the table littered with legal documents that spelled out the end of our shared life and the beginnings of their complicated future. Start over? I echoed, my voice tinged with incredulity. David, after everything, do you think it's that simple? My question was rhetorical, laced with the bitterness of betrayal, yet holding a sliver of pity for the man I once loved. You didn't just betray a wife, David. You betrayed a life we built together, piece by piece, year by year. Alicia, still reeling from the revelation about the baby's paternity, sat silent, her usual smug demeanor replaced by a visage of shock and despair. She avoided eye contact, her gaze fixed on the papers in front of her, a stark contrast to the confident woman who had walked into my home, thinking she could usurp my place with impunity. David's face was a mask of regret and confusion. I didn't know about the baby. Alicia, why didn't you tell me? His voice broke as he turned towards Alicia, seeking answers that she was not ready to provide. Alicia's voice was barely a whisper, I was going to tell you, David. I thought we'd figure it out together. Her explanation fell flat, the hollowness echoing in the now chilly room. I leaned back in my chair, observing the crumbling facade of their alliance. It was a poignant reminder of how quickly things could fall apart when built on deception. David, you've made your choices. And Alicia, you've made yours. What happens next is on you both. As for starting over, my new beginning does not include either of you. David looked at me, the realization dawning that the life he had envisioned with Alicia was slipping through his fingers. Catherine, I am truly sorry. I was a fool, and I've lost everything that truly mattered. His apology, sincere as it might have been, came too late. Apologies don't rebuild shattered trust, David. They don't restore years of life spent together under false pretenses. I stood up, gathering my documents. Good luck to you both. You'll need it. As I walked out of the lawyer's office, the weight of the past few months seemed to lift slightly with each step. The cool air outside was a balm to the heated atmosphere I had left behind. I walked towards my car, a sense of closure filling me. The legal ties had been severed, and the emotional ones were quickly following suit. Driving away, I felt the finality of it all settling in. There was no joy in the outcome, no satisfaction in the revelations that had come to light, only a profound sense of relief that it was finally over. Now, it was time to rebuild, to find joy in the solitude and freedom that came with being unencumbered by another's deceit. My future, once tied to others' choices, was now my own to shape. As I drove off, the future seemed not just a possibility, but a promise. That this would secure her future financially and give her the upper hand in our long-standing sibling rivalry. However, Alicia's plans crumbled when the truth about her motives and David's financial reality came to light. Sitting across from Emily at dinner, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. Her support and decision to stay with me through this ordeal meant the world. "Mom, I'm so proud of how you handled everything. It's like you finally took back your life," Emily said, her eyes bright with admiration and relief. "I did, didn't I?" I replied, smiling back at her. It felt like a rebirth, shaking off the chains of a toxic marriage and stepping into a role of my own making, not defined by someone else's deceit or manipulation. Emily nodded vigorously. "And I'm here for you, all the way. No more letting people take advantage of us." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the weight of what Emily had said lingered. Her recognition of my strength, her unwavering support, it rejuvenated my spirit. The following weeks were a flurry of legal and financial adjustments. With Alicia and David's true colors revealed, and their marriage hastily executed under dubious pretenses, their life together began to unravel just as mine was knitting back together. David's downward spiral was pitiful, yet part of me couldn't help but feel it was just retribution for the pain he had caused. The schadenfreude was minimal, though, overshadowed by the relief of no longer having to deal with his deceit. As for Alicia, her situation was a stark reminder of how greed and envy can poison a person's life. She had chased after illusions, believing that undermining my happiness would somehow lead to her fulfillment. Now, with her plans foiled and her comforts stripped away, she was left to face the consequences of her actions alone. The community, once so enamored with the drama, gradually lost interest as Alicia and David faded into the backdrop of more pressing local gossip. Life moved on, and so did I. Emily and I grew closer, our bond strengthened by adversity and triumph. We often discussed plans for the future, dreams that were now possible with the toxic cloud of my past relationship finally dispelled. I invested more time into my hobbies, rediscovering passions that I had put aside during my marriage. Emily, inspired by my resilience, pursued her studies with renewed vigor, determined to make her own mark on the world. In this new chapter of our lives, we focused on building joy from the ashes of hardship, embracing each day not with the bitterness of past betrayals, but with the hopeful anticipation of new beginnings. As we sat together in our cozy kitchen, planning a trip just for the two of us, I realized that the greatest revenge had been living well, finding happiness, and loving freely, far away from the shadows of the past. I couldn't help but laugh at myself a little. There I was, years past what many would call the prime of youth, feeling those familiar butterflies at the prospect of a dinner with a man who had unexpectedly become a significant figure in my life post-divorce. As I applied a touch of lipstick, my reflection showed a woman transformed, not just externally, but internally. The hardship I had endured with David and the subsequent emancipation from that toxic relationship had sculpted me into a stronger, more self-assured individual. The irony of finding a connection with Alicia's ex-husband was not lost on me. It was an unexpected twist in my narrative, one that even a few years ago I would never have imagined possible. He was indeed a decent man, surprisingly considerate and insightful, qualities that Alicia seemingly failed to appreciate during their brief, tumultuous marriage. Perhaps it was these traits that drew me to him, the stark contrast to what I had lived with for so long. Our dinners had started out as friendly meetings, two people sharing the bond of having been wronged by the same woman, seeking companionship in their mutual disillusionment. However, over time, those meetings seemed to have evolved into something more tender, more intentional. Tonight, he hinted at wanting to discuss something important, and that suggestion alone was enough to send a wave of anticipation through me. Could he be feeling the same growing affection that I was? Or was I reading too much into simple kindness and the pleasant company of someone with shared experiences? I checked my phone again for any new messages. Nothing yet. The wait was excruciating, but also exhilarating. After everything I had been through, the idea of opening up to the possibility of a new relationship was daunting yet thrilling. I stood up, took a deep breath, and gave myself a final once-over in the mirror. "You've got this, Catherine," I murmured to myself. Whatever was to come from tonight's dinner, I was ready for it. I was no longer the woman who let her circumstances define her happiness. I was in control, ready to face whatever life had to offer with a newfound vigor. As I grabbed my purse and headed out the door, a sense of freedom enveloped me. It was the freedom of knowing that no matter what was discussed over dinner, I was strong enough to embrace it, whether it brought joy or disappointment. Tonight wasn't just about the potential of a new romantic chapter, it was a celebration of my resilience, my ability to recover and find contentment in a life I crafted on my own